Hello, everyone. Perhaps you might remember that my name is María Isabel, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you and to be part of the Language Challenge project on this journey with you and Augusto and the rest of the volunteers at Becas Latam. It's so inspiring to see your videos with you speaking English and your essays. You're doing such a good job. I'm so impressed. And I look forward to offering you feedback to help you in continuing to improve your English communication skills. So today I've prepared a presentation about phrasal verbs, and I can only imagine how frustrating it must be to learn these because we have them in so many different contexts and we use them so often in English. And I can only imagine that you might feel like giving up sometimes, but don't. Hang in there. With practice and perseverance, you can get closer and closer to learning more and more of these. Let's get started. This is what we are going to focus on in the lesson. First, we are going to look at what are phrasal verbs. Then, we'll see if there's a way of making sense of them. And we'll cover some of the most recommended ways of learning them. We'll then practice understanding some phrasal verbs in their context, and we'll also practice using these verbally in the sample sentences. And finally, we'll review phrasal verbs that I will mention throughout the lesson, but that are not written on the presentation. So keep an ear out for them. So what are phrasal verbs? Phrasal verbs are idiomatic phrases made up of a verb and a particle. For example, here we have made up. Remember, the particle is the most important part of the phrasal verbs. Here, made up means to consist of, and the verb is made and the particle is up. Another example related to this class can be this sentence. Let's brush up on phrasal verbs. Can you guess what that means? And another one that I mentioned earlier is, I look forward to offering you feedback. Particles, remember the most important part of the phrasal verbs, can be either prepositions or adverbs. The most common particles are these: up, down, in, out, on, off. And here are some more of the common phrasal verb particles. So how can we make sense of phrasal verbs? Is there a system for learning these idiomatic phrases? Yes, there is a way of getting around learning some phrasal verbs. And the key is to understand the particles and how they are used to describe how the mind works and understands a situation in terms of perspective and spatial orientation. So let's look into this. The way we experience life shapes the way that we communicate with each other. And so conceptual metaphors can be very useful in understanding the way that particles are used to describe a situation or perspective on a situation or our spatial orientation in a situation. So for example, the particles on, off, up, down, in, out, as you can see, are related to location in space and direction as well. And so their basic meaning is related to spatial orientation. As you might have realized, particles like up, high, down, low are universally used in metaphors. Many languages use these metaphors to refer to quantities and to power and status. For instance, in the sentence, work keeps on piling up. It never seems to end. This means there is more and more work. It keeps on adding up. It is increasing. Another example. Employees usually want to move up the corporate ladder. This means people want to advance in their professional career path. They want to move up. And when we look at down low, here are other examples. These batteries don't run down so quickly, which means they don't get used up so quickly. Their lifespan is durable. Tunisian protesters helped bring down the prime minister. Here, the prime minister had to step down from his job. He was removed from his leadership position. Keep in mind, though, that there are different metaphors, and it can be difficult to explain metaphors in phrasal verbs. In some cases, up, down can have similar meanings. So even though they might be opposites in direction, in some cases, they might be similar. Let's look at this. Up is related to completion, and down with ending. And completion and ending are related in meaning. Let's look at some examples. Break up, breakdown. Ian broke up with his girlfriend. Their relationship ended. Another example, with down. The board decided to wind down all business activities and close the organization. As you might be able to understand from the context, the business ended. So as you can see, up and down have the similar meaning of ending or of something being completed. Okay, now that we've covered how to understand particles, let's walk through some guidelines to best learn phrasal verbs. This lesson has information that I've gathered from a few websites, videos, and textbooks. I'll make sure to share a list of resources with you. Okay, so tips for learning phrasal verbs. First, learn them in chunks. The best ways of grouping them are by topic, particle, and meaning. Perhaps it's a good idea to begin by learning about topics that interest you the most or that are the most important for you to learn at this time. Some topics can be education, communication, feelings, relationships, and many more. Grouping them by particle is also a very useful way of learning phrasal verbs. As I mentioned earlier, particles are the most important aspect of learning phrasal verbs, as they can change the meaning of the verb. Remember, it's not recommended to learn them by verbs, such as get, take, put, and so on. That might only confuse you. Stick to the particles. And a third useful way of grouping these are by their meaning, like opposites or similar and same. For example, you can create a list of phrasal verbs that are opposites and some that are similar or same in meaning. One example of opposites are turn off the computer, turn on the computer. Okay, let's look a little bit more into how we can group these phrasal verbs. Do you remember the first way we can group them? One way is by topic. Here, we'll look at some examples of phrasal verbs used in the education and the business world. Try to come up with the meaning of the phrasal verb within its context. Also, repeat after me. Perhaps that'll help you think of it in terms of context, and you'll get to practice saying and using these phrasal verbs. Let's get started. I need to brush up on my Latin American history. Repeat. What do you think it means? Brush up on means to improve existing knowledge or skill. For example, brush up on English skills, on editing, writing, and so forth. Next, the team came up with great ideas for the campaign. Repeat. What can it mean? Came up with means to think of or suggest a plan or idea, a solution to a problem, or an answer to a question. Other examples can be came up with a plan, came up with an answer, and so on. Next, they need to catch up on their work. Repeat. What can it mean? Catch up on, in this context, means having to do something you did not have time to do earlier. Other examples can be catch up on the news, catch up on emails, and so on. Okay, now let's look at another way that we can group phrasal verbs. Do you remember what that was? By particles. Let's look at out in terms of its meaning as an ending. Remember to listen and repeat each sentence and try to come up with the meaning of the phrasal verb within its context. She dropped out of college because of family issues. Repeat. What do you think it means? Drop out means to stop going to classes before finishing a course or a program. Next, I can't believe we ran out of vanilla extract so soon. Repeat. What do you think it means? Here, run out means to use all of something so that there is none left. And finally, their relationship fizzled out after a year or so. Repeat. What do you think it means? Fizzle out means to gradually end or disappear, especially in a disappointing way. Okay, now let's move along to a third way of grouping phrasal verbs. By their meaning. Either opposites or similar and same. Here, we'll review a few opposites. Remember, listen and repeat each sentence and try to come up with their meaning. How can we speed up the process? Repeat. What does it mean? Speed up means to cause someone or something to move or happen more quickly. An opposite example. During the holidays, things slow down quite a bit over here. Repeat. And what does it mean? It's easy to think of the opposite of speed up. To slow down means to become slower or to make something or someone slower. Okay, now let's look at a second way of learning phrasal verbs. Number 2. Pay attention to what you listen and read. Take down notes of new phrasal verbs and look them up online in a dictionary. I'm sure some of you already go about learning these ways. Nonetheless, reminders can be useful, and hopefully you'll get some new ideas from this list of resources. So moving along, number 1. Try to be proactive in your learning. Listen and read carefully as you enjoy your favorite movies, series, podcasts, books, YouTube videos, and so on. Perhaps you can keep a notebook handy so that you can jot down new phrasal verbs and look further into them. Another idea: catch up on world events. You can come across many phrasal verbs in newspaper headlines. Here are some examples. He wrote a gardening column. He ended up documenting climate change, from the New York Times. And Tokyo 2021 Olympics briefing. The show must go on, from The Guardian. And lastly, use sites like phrasaldemon.com or dictionaries specific to phrasal verbs so that you can look up new meanings. Moving along to the third tip for learning phrasal verbs. Build up your communication skills by learning and using them consistently through spaced repetition and in context. Remember, phrasal verbs can have different meanings in different situations. Gradually, keep on learning their various uses. And lastly, substitute words with phrasal verbs in speaking and in writing exercises. For example, if you were to say, "The meeting was canceled," you can instead say, "The meeting was called off." Or, instead of, "I like reading books about history," you can say, "I'm into reading books about history." Go online and find a list of different phrasal verbs that have one-word synonyms. Okay, now, let's put into practice what we've been reviewing. Let's work on an exercise activity. Read and listen to the phrasal verbs used in the sentences and see if you can make out their meaning by understanding them within their context. And also, let's repeat after each sentence. First, the teacher extended the deadline to hand in the essay. Repeat. What can it mean? It means that students can turn in, which also means submit, their essays on a later date. Okay, next one. Let's put off the presentation until next Thursday. Repeat. What does it mean? It means that someone is suggesting to postpone the presentation until Thursday. Okay, next and last one. Let's run this by the client. Repeat. What does it mean? It means that someone is suggesting to check in with a client on something to make sure they understand or approve. In this case, check in means to tell. How did it go? Did you understand most of those phrasal verbs? Were there any new ones for you? Okay, so now before we end with the lesson, here is the list of the tips that we've just covered. And now for the last part of the lesson. Did you pick up on any new phrasal verbs that I mentioned that are not written on the presentation? Do you recall? Or did you take down any notes? Here is a list. Do you know the meaning of all of these phrasal verbs? Well, it's time to put into practice what we've covered, and perhaps you can go on and check out phrasaldemon.com or other dictionaries to look up meanings to phrasal verbs. Well, that's all for today. I hope that you have come across new phrasal verbs and that the information here can help you continue to learn and approach learning these words in a different and more useful way. And so I look forward to hearing from you. Please feel free to share any ideas for improvement, or if you have any questions, or if there's anything in particular that you'd like us to focus a little bit more on, we can see what we can do for you. Okay? Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.